Hi, welcome to When Songs Mean Business. I'm your host, Steph Belcher. Today's episode covers the topic of core values, and we discuss why core values are the most important thing that you need when you're establishing a business, especially right from the beginning. I tell a little bit about my story and explain how I landed on my core values, and I start to dive into specific ways of how you can establish your core values too. I have a worksheet available to help you on my website, stephbelcher.com. And we have conversations like this regularly in our Patreon group. So you can check that out at patreon.com/whensongsmeanbusiness. So let's dive in to the core values episode of When Songs Mean Business. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about me and how I got started. So I started in the music business when I was in high school. I grew up in a very musical family. My maternal grandmother was a concert pianist, and so her kids and all their kids all played piano, and it was just expected that I would play piano. My mom played guitar. Everybody was in various choirs. And then on my dad's side of the family is Hungarian, and they were all in this big giant Hungarian Catholic band. So everybody played something. Everybody played everything, really. So music is just sort of normal in my life. It was always something that I knew I would do, but I didn't know exactly what road I was going to take because I did play piano, but it wasn't easy enough for me to keep up with all of the difficult stuff when it came down to it. As a little kid, when you guys probably know, practicing is hard when you're a kid, and guitar has always been tough for me. I love singing and dancing. Those are my two favorite things. But in high school, I started to become friends with bands and friends with groups of musicians, and I noticed that they needed help kind of being told what they should do next or being introduced to people, when my friends were performing on stage, they needed somebody in the crowd who was working the room on their behalf. I didn't know that was called a manager, and I didn't know exactly what road it was going to take me down. So when I went to college, I decided to major in journalism. I was going to double major in journalism and music. I ended up not being able to get into the music program because of the auditions and the theory requirements. So I transitioned to a degree called telecommunications, and that led me into media management. So the foundation of my music career was much broader than just music. It was television production and how to run a radio station and how to navigate the internet. And this was in the early 2000s. So I got a very broad media education, which really served me well as the internet kind of exploded and time moved on. But my passion for the music business comes from concerts. And I figured out pretty quickly in college that I could get into concerts for free if I was an usher at the auditorium. So that was my very first entry level kind of music business job, was ushering at the Indiana University Auditorium. I got to see Rent and Ani DiFranco and Counting Crows and a bunch of big early 2000 bands. And then I started to wonder who was booking these concerts. And I thought it was really cool that there were people who were negotiating all of the logistics behind the scenes, and I wanted to be part of that. So I ended up joining the Indiana University Concerts Committee, which brought big shows and small shows to campus. Some of them were ticketed, some of them were free. All of them were negotiated through agents mostly and foundations like NACA. And then that led me into getting to know more agents and more promoters in the music business. So when I graduated, I had the opportunity to move out to LA, but my dad was dealing with a cancer diagnosis, and I didn't want to. I grew up in Cleveland, and I didn't want to leave the Cleveland area. So I moved back home, and eventually, that if you guys have ever lived through a parent having cancer, it can be pretty heavy. So I actually did end up moving out of Cleveland, which I kind of regret, but we can talk about that another day. So I ended up moving to Denver for a little while. And when I was in Denver, I worked for a booking agency. And then I didn't really like working for the booking agency. Contracts, it was a lot of contracts and phone calls and negotiations, and that just wasn't really my strong suit. I wanted to be doing more of like planning the shows, marketing the shows, kind of being like boots on the ground. So I moved to Chicago, and I started working with promoters, and I was the marketing manager for an MP3 distribution company that focused on unsigned bands. So this was in 2006, and this MP3 distribution company had only people who were not signed, because iTunes had a lock on all the major labels. So we weren't able to negotiate with any major labels at this time. So we were really recruiting college bands. And that's when I fell in love with like the emerging music market. I had kind of always been in that world, but it wasn't really until 2006 when I decided to go all in on like indie DIY musicians who were right at the beginning of their careers, just really trying to get that upstart. So while I was working there, I also worked for a couple of venues, Subterranean and Beat Kitchen in Chicago, and then I picked up some gigs at Tonic Room and a couple other small venues around Chicago. And I just fell in love with like the independent music market. So in 2006 and 2007, it was okay, you know, financially, music it hadn't bottomed out yet. But in 2008 and 2009, it got really tough, and the recession hit independent music really, really hard. So I saw a lot of shows, you know, the rooms went dark for a lot of Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and the recession hit those kinds of companies really hard. So there wasn't as much work, and I needed a day job. So I basically just took the first job that I could find, the first stable job, and that was at a tax prep agency in Chicago. And I never in a million years had expected to work at a tax agency. I didn't take any accounting classes. I never studied anything like that. And it was really stressful. You know, I started in January of 2009. So if you guys remember January of 2009, that was like the boom of the foreclosure time. Everybody's lives were completely falling apart. It was a disaster everywhere. When you foreclose on a house, you get a 1099 for the amount that they forgive. They don't forgive it. You have to pay tax on it. So people were getting 1099s for hundreds of thousands of dollars and calling me. And I was answering the phone at this tax agency where I had just started. And they're like, hey, I just got a 1099 for $250,000. Do I have to pay tax on that? And I had to figure it out as I went. We all were figuring it out as we went. And it turned out that the President Obama, and Congress did forgive most of those foreclosures. But, you know, people were going through terrible times. And that was my first tax job. That was my first job that wasn't in the music business or waitressing. So at first, I couldn't wait to get out. It was so much stress and so much pressure, and I didn't think I was cut out for it. And I quit on April 15th. Like, I was done. And then, you know, the recession was still in full swing, and I had a really hard time finding another job. So 2009, for the year of 2009, I had 6 different W-2s. I tried managing a restaurant for 8 weeks and it got shut down. I tried working at the front desk of a real estate agency that leased apartments in this giant high-rise in Chicago, and that wasn't a good fit for me. I tried to be the executive assistant to a publisher who was putting out a music magazine, but that didn't work out. And so eventually I ended up going back to the tax agency. And at that point, I was just desperate. Like, my husband and I were planning our wedding. We had just signed a lease on a duplex in Chicago. We had just gotten a dog. So I went back to the tax agency kind of with my tail between my legs, and I was like, all right, listen, I can handle the stress of this job, but we have to put some systems in place, and we have to have structure, and we have to really organize the way that these people are handled when they come at us with these, these stressful questions. We have to have like processes in place. So my bosses at that job were fully on board with that. They loved it. And so I spent the next few months, I went back in like November before tax season, and I spent the next few months like organizing all of the client databases and reaching out to people who I knew were in trouble, and kind of being like proactive about the whole situation. And I realized that we were helping people. And then I kind of got hooked on it, and I realized how stressful the whole tax and bookkeeping situation can be for most people. And I realized that I had a knack for putting systems and processes and plans in place that help guide people through it and make them feel better about the whole thing, really. So I stayed in that job for 2.5 more years until my husband and I decided to move to Michigan. We had a baby and we wanted to be closer to family. So we moved to Michigan. And then once I was here, I didn't know anybody. I knew one person, and that was Matthew Altruda, who is, if you're going to know one person in Michigan, he's the one person to know. He was the only person I knew that lived here. And I didn't have any leads on any jobs or anything. So my husband grew up here. That's how we ended up here. So we moved to Michigan. I started to go to shows in Ann Arbor and get to know the Ann Arbor, Michigan, or the Ann Arbor music scene. Got to know Detroit a little bit, went to some shows at St. Andrews, and a lot of the venues that are open now weren't even open then. This was in like early 2012. So I ended up going to the H&R Block tax school and learning how to do a tax return, which was cool. H&R Block teaches you to do a tax return with a pencil and a piece of paper. So I have a really thorough understanding of all the different sections of the tax return and why they're important. And that's something that I'm really grateful for. Even though I didn't like working at H&R Block and I didn't want to stay there, their tax school is amazing. So I really appreciated, being able to move here and take their class. But I ended up at a CPA firm who basically allowed me to bring in all my own clients. And I went back to Matthew and I asked him if he knew anybody who needed help with their taxes. And here we are. So since that conversation, which happened in 2013, I have been doing taxes for musicians and helping them with their bookkeeping and, kind of like building their companies, developing their marketing systems, and getting everything in order. So this full program that I've developed is really built upon everything that I've done over the last 20 years. It's got all the marketing stuff from the early days, and it's got all the internet stuff that I did in the middle, and the tax stuff and the marketing for tax, and it's all kind of built upon itself. And at this point, I have a network of friends and other people that work in the music business that help guide me toward new resources. I'm always learning. I read a lot. I have my books over here. I got my little library because I want to make sure to talk to you guys about the resources that I use when I am building a business, helping somebody build a business, because I don't pretend to do this alone. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum. So I use a lot of resources, and I want to kind of start with the different resources that we're going to be using, that I'm going to be referencing. My favorite business building book is called Traction, and it's written by a guy named Gino Wickman. And Traction it's basically a book that says that in order to grow your business, you have to have one central entrepreneurial operating system. And it lays out how that operating system is designed. That's my favorite one for kind of designing businesses and developing scorecards and really honing in like a laser focus on what you're good at and what's important to you and where you want to go. So those are kind of the three biggest things we're going to be pulling out of that. My favorite mindset book is called The Subtle Art of Not Giving Up. And this is written by a guy named Mark Manson. And this one is about your values. And this one is really written about how we have decided early in our days, early in our lives, what was important to us. And we tend to cling to those beliefs. Sometimes it wasn't even our original thoughts. You know, our parents told us what was important to us, or somebody from high school, we wanted to be just like them. So we decided that one thing that they do is cool, and we cling to that even if it's not even relevant to our lives anymore. So I'll be referencing this book in a mindset way of how to figure out what's actually important to you. And yeah, I could have a whole class on this book. It's amazing. My favorite music business book is called Rockonomics, and it was written by the late Alan Kruger. He was a mentor of mine. I follow his career very closely, and his death kind of rattled my world. So Rockonomics is the economics of the music business. And back in the day, they used to say that you couldn't measure the economics of the music business because you can't measure the value of what music brings to somebody's life. So I grew up, you know, I spent a lot of time believing that, but the internet has changed that for us. And this book kind of dives into the statistics that we're now able to pull from ticket sales and streaming, and how many musicians are out there, how many musicians are live streaming on a daily basis and uploading music. So I highly recommend this one if you like economics and data. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Another one this is kind of a general business book, but it's just a starting a business quick start guide, not QuickBooks. And this one is really general. You know, this one talks more about starting a retail shop or sales and stuff like that. So I like this one because it covers the bigger picture business. It doesn't just focus on music. A couple other ones that we'll talk about are Hitmakers by Derek Thompson. He writes about why something becomes popular, and I think that he has a lot of valuable things to say about that. The most inspirational book I've ever read about writing is called Writing Down the Bones, and it's a series of essays. This one is by Natalie Goldberg, and I'm gonna, just so you guys know, I'm gonna write a list of all these for you so you don't have to try to memorize them. But she's a poet, and she is extremely inspiring about letting go of your internal editor and just letting yourself write and being free with your words and kind of telling your story the way that the pen ends up on the paper and not thinking about it too much, letting your hand kind of do the writing. Like, for example, one of my favorite ones, it says, "We are not the poem." And the first line is, "The problem is we think we exist. We think our words are permanent and solid and stamp us forever. That's not true. We write in the moment." And I think that that is true for a lot of music that we create, because that music that we create exists in that moment only. And yes, people go back and listen to it, but the way that you created it and the feelings that you felt when you wrote it and performed it might never exist again. So this one really inspires me when I have writer's block or when I'm just not feeling creative. Yeah. So, oh, and then the other one is my finance book, Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. This book will change your life if you have money problems. Dave Ramsey can be kind of a polarizing figure because of the way that he talks. He's very stern. He gets right to the point, cuts right to the chase. Some people disagree with his strategies, but I have found a lot of success following his debt snowball methods. I read this book a couple years ago, and since then I've paid off thousands of dollars of debt. I've closed a bunch of accounts that, you know, I was using for no reason and paying a bunch of interest on. So I'm going to be referencing this one when we're talking about budgeting. His is my favorite budgeting method. because of the way he ranks, he prioritizes the way that things should be paid. And I think that that is something that's really important to getting a handle on everything. So those are pretty much the references that we're going to be using. So let's dive into what you actually came here to learn about, and that is how to manage your business, right? So one of the things that I learned when I was doing people's taxes is I would see the same people year after year, and they would sit down with me and say, they would feel bad about themselves. They would sit down feeling bad and say, I made the same amount of money I did last year. And I could tell that they felt like they were a failure because of that. And I said, well, did you want to make more? Like, what was your goal? And they're like, oh, I didn't really have a goal. I just was hoping to make more. It's like, okay, well, what was your plan? Like, did anything change? Did you try anything new? I could tell that they felt bad about not growing, but that they also weren't doing anything to grow. And so that always led to the conversation of what can we be doing to be growing our businesses year over year, so that when we sit down with our tax preparer a year from now, if you sit down with somebody and you want to say, I made so much more money this year, aren't you proud of me? Then you actually have to try. You have to put in the effort. So it kind of ended up where people were almost asking me for marketing advice in our tax appointments. And a lot of the time when somebody's asking me for marketing advice, I would say something to the effect of like, well, what's important to you? What are your values? What's your social media plan? And I could see that there was like no plan. It was people were just winging it, throwing spaghetti at the wall. So tax season's tax season basically happens from January to April, and then kind of like August to October. And so there's some dead time in there. So my boss gave me the freedom to help our tax clients with their marketing and building their businesses during the summer and during the off season. And that was really valuable to a lot of people. And I was able to help a lot of my tax clients grow their businesses. So the way that we did it was actually by following the Traction book at first, at least. And I've built upon it quite a bit since then. But, people were asking me like, how can I get more fans? How can I get more clients? And it always comes back to what's important to you. What are your core values? And the fact that people buy from people. People don't buy products. They buy from people. We're humans, and whenever we're trying to grow, we're looking for other humans to grow with us. And we're trying to build a community around the thing that we're doing. In order to build that community, the first thing that we have to know is what's important to us and what are our core values and what are our deal breakers. Because a lot of time we don't really know what our core values are until they're violated. And then that violation feels horrible. And we know that we never want to go down that road again. And whatever the opposite is of that, that's our value. That's the most important thing to us. Basically, your core values start with what's your why. And that why statement can be really, really powerful when you're trying to bring other people on board, whether it's other employees, new clients, or fans. The reason that you're doing it can become such a story of how you got here. For me, a huge part of my why comes from my family, because music has always been so important to me that it never even occurred to me that there was something else that I could do or should do. It was just always the thing. And so my why was like, because my family does, because I should, because it's the thing. And that really wasn't enough for me. I needed to dive a little bit deeper into that, because when things got really hard in 2008 and 2009, that the family element of it wasn't enough to sustain me. My dad had just passed away. I wasn't close to a lot of the other people that played music, and it wasn't enough. It really wasn't. So then I went and worked at the tax agency, and I started helping people. And that became my real why. You know, my real why is to help people and to teach people and to help them plant the seeds of their businesses and grow them into these fruitful things that they can harvest for years and years to come. And it wasn't until, you know, I had to basically give music up that I kind of discovered that. So writing it down and putting your why statement and putting your core values on paper is so important, because eventually, if you haven't already, you're going to be hiring people to work with you soon. If you're a performer, you're going to have a manager and an agent and a PR person and a tour manager and band members and a producer. We're all going to be working with so many different people, and everybody needs to be on the same page. So if you bring somebody on because you like them and because you have heard good things about them, but you don't check their value system and they don't check your value system, then you're not going to know you're not a good fit until that violation happens. And something really tragic could happen in that moment if we don't prevent it and hedge it off at the beginning. So having your core values written out is something that allows you to bring on new team members, new fans, and new clients in a way that connects with them on a very deep level. So what are core values, right? The definition: core values are deep-seated, intrinsic, motivating factors for all the decisions that you make in your daily work and your personal life. And I'm going to write this down for you. You can take notes if you want. But they're deep-seated. They are in your gut. They are things that have been with you since you were probably very young. They're intrinsic. You might have been born with them. You can't really help them. They're like instinct almost. And they're motivating. They are the reason that you do this. They are the things that fire you up and like get you like super psyched. And they guide your decisions, because when you have to make a decision between doing A or doing B, it's your value that's really gonna stop you. It's gonna be that deal breaker from doing the thing that you don't want to do. And sometimes it's really hard to actually pinpoint that actual reason, because we're so caught up in like the logic or the emotion or the need to just get something done. And that's where a lot of the violations come from, right? So a lot of times these values are weaving in and out of your jobs and your relationships and your hobbies. Some people's values, like I love to use my grandpa as an example of core values, because he was a lawyer at a law firm. He was a partner, but he didn't work 80 hours a week. He was home every single night for dinner. And because of that, they weren't like the super wealthy kind of lawyers. You know, they had a country club membership, which, because my grandpa liked to play golf, but they were just kind of normal people. And yes, my grandpa probably could have made twice as much money, but he wouldn't have been home for dinner every night. And that family element was more important to him than being the big hotshot lawyer. So these values are not just present in your work, they're in everything. And you know, you might even know, you're probably sitting there thinking right now, like, what are my values? And it's not that easy. I'm going to guide you through kind of how to dissect them, but you've probably already identified a few of them. You know, like some really common ones are honesty. A lot of people don't like working with somebody who would lie to them blatantly to their face. And when, you know, once that violation happens, you're like, I'm done with this person. And then you start to put those walls up and be more closed off to people who tell lies, or you can tell, you know, you kind of just start to see it. So some people don't value honesty. They value profits. And they don't care if you lie to them as long as you're making them a bunch of money. That happens in, you know, shadier businesses than ours. So in music, some of the ones that I see a lot are collaboration and connection and innovation. You know, I see a lot of musicians who always want the newest, coolest, gear and products that they can play around with. Some people don't want that at all. Some people, tradition is one of their core values, and they want to impart on their children and their children's children like the tradition of storytelling and how it's done. For one of my clients, traveling was really important to her, and she started traveling when she was really young with her parents, and they instilled in her this sense of adventure. And she was kind of homeschooled. She was really involved with like other people's cultures, and as she grew into adulthood, it was kind of a problem for her because it was really tough for her to hold down a job. And there was a lot of people, like boyfriends and people, who felt like she was always flitting off into all these different places. But it was just extremely important to her. But that made her an exceptionally good touring musician because she could sleep on couches. She was totally okay with being on the road for weeks at a time. She was always ready to meet new people. And once she came to peace with the fact that traveling was a value of hers and that fighting it was pointless, then she became really successful at touring. These are the kinds of values that I want you guys to start thinking about. And like, you're probably not going to be able to do tonight, overnight. This is going to take you a little while, but I have a worksheet for you that should help. And, if you think about the reasons why you create and the reasons why you work in the music business and, why you write songs and why you do whatever it is that you're doing. Sometimes it helps to narrow down this list of values by eliminating the ones that are like deal breakers. And one of my favorite ones is that one of my clients, one of their values was original music. And he was a really talented guitar player, and he kept getting asked to be in cover bands. And he kept saying yes. So he kept joining these cover bands, and then he was miserable. And, we talked about it, and I said, like, you value original music, but you're going and playing other people's music. And he was like, yeah, I know, and I always just wish I was doing my own thing. And, I had to say, like, the reason you're upset is because you're violating your values every single day. So I had to basically tell him that he didn't value money, the money from the cover gigs, as much as he valued creating his own weird avant-garde thing that he was doing that was like so different from anything that I've ever even heard, So a lot of times when you violate these core values, if you do it in like a public way, your fans are going to know that you just sold out. And that's something that can actually really hurt you as you're trying to grow and as you're trying to bring on new fans. So it really helps to establish these core values right at the beginning and tell your own story and then really live by them so that you don't violate them in a public way later that shocks and offends your fans in a way that like turns them off and makes you lose them forever, right? So what I love about musicians establishing their core values is that these values can be used for marketing strategies. They can be used in your pricing and when you're choosing personnel, and they basically weave in and out of every single element of your business. One thing I want to note is that I think that core values are inside of each person, but which ones you display can vary based on individual projects. And that's okay. That's totally okay. Like if you're one of the people who's like, well, I like cover bands and original music's important to me, but it's not necessarily a core value, that's fine. That's totally fine. Maybe for you, it's more of like technical proficiency and you don't want to play any music with a bunch of people that don't practice or something like that. So, I want you to kind of figure out like, what are the values that are important to you in your heart, and then apply specific ones to specific projects. It's totally okay to use different values for different projects. And I would like to share with you guys what my core values are, if you don't mind, so that to give you kind of an example. So I talked about how these can be used in marketing. I think that each value can be a blog post Each one can be like, this is why certain things are important to me. I'm going to tell you guys why original music's important to me. And I want to talk to you about technical proficiency because it's something that's really important to me. And here's my practice schedule kind of thing. So mine are my number one, and they're not exactly in order, but my number one is optimism. And that one, if you guys know me personally, I just I can't get away from my little Pollyanna sunshine thing. But I really do tend to see the good in all situations and all people. I see potential in everybody. I see positive energy as a tangible thing that we can give to each other. And that's why I love live music so much. I think that is the whole foundation of live music, is taking this giant ball of electricity and giving it to your fans and having them go out in the world and then share it. And it's this exponential growth. So pessimism is not a thing for me. And I have a hard time. I don't have a lot of close friends that are extremely pessimistic. If you come at me every single day telling me how terrible the world is, my sunshine will try to overwhelm that darkness. So that's really my number one thing, is optimism. And then community. My second one is community. I believe that music and artists are the foundations of communities. And I strive to give resources to these people so that they can make their communities better. Another one that's really important to me is lifelong learning. I wasn't always a teacher. I think that teaching is what I'm probably going to do for the rest of my life. But it really took kind of me identifying these values to realize that I am constantly learning. I'm trying to learn stuff every single day. And I want the people that I work closely with to share that with me. I believe in learning. I think that, learning new strategies and processes and technologies and sharing information with each other is one of the ways to find joy in life when things get really hard. So if I'm bored, I'll go learn something. I used to read the encyclopedia and the almanac when I was bored, when I was a kid. And that's just something that's always been super important to me. So one of the ones that I only just recently kind of wrapped my brain around was alignment. The word alignment is super important to me. And that one, I was not in alignment for a very long time. But then I kind of figured out that when you're doing your best work, it feels easy and it doesn't really feel like work. You're just kind of firing on all cylinders and none of it's painful. You don't really procrastinate on it. And this alignment is something that I seek in all areas of my life. I don't let people who are going to throw me out of alignment come too close because it's really important to me. It's more important to me than having a fake relationship, right? And then the last one that I wrote down is ambition. And I genuinely want to change the world. I want to change the music business. I want to fix these giant problems that the music business has. A lot of them start with money. I want to change policy. I would love to be involved with, I almost just said I want to be involved with politics. That's not accurate. I don't want to be involved with politics. But I do want to change policies so that musicians have an easier time getting the resources that they need and so that we can elicit real change in the marketplace. And if I have to be involved with politics in order to make that happen, then that's another conversation for another day. But those are my 5 core values: optimism, community, lifelong learning, alignment, and ambition. And I think that those of you who know me know that I do live them. I hope I live them. I try to bring people together as best I can. I try to inspire people. And there's a bunch of companies that I like identifying their core values. Lady Gaga has amazing core values. So this article, and I'll post it in the group, is called Business Lessons from Lady Gaga. But her values are the following: have a clear identity. She doesn't go by her given name. She became the person that she wanted to be. And when I say the phrase Lady Gaga, you guys know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about this woman who lives this avant-garde artistic lifestyle and stands up for what she believes in and fights for marginalized people. And she's different. You know, one of her core values is to be unique and to shine in your own way. And she's written songs about it, and the people who follow her know that they can be themselves in her group and at her shows. Create an experience. If you've ever been to a Lady Gaga concert, it's definitely an experience. Even watching her movie was an experience. Another one of her values is to stand up for something bigger than yourself. And she wrote, at one point she wrote, "I want women and men to feel empowered by a deeper and more psychotic part of themselves. The part they're always trying desperately to hide. I want that to become something that they cherish. To everyone who says that this is wrong to feel like this, I say I was born this way, baby." And that's so important to me. And the last value that they identify here is to foster a community. She calls them her little monsters. She's written a manifesto for them, created an app for them. She has millions and millions of Twitter and YouTube and Instagram followers. And the people that follow her really closely, they really feel connected to her brand and to her values. She is a great example of somebody who identified them and lives them and presents them to their fans. And she says to everybody, she says, if you don't follow these values and you don't care, then I don't need you. And that's something that I think is really important, because a lot of musicians, we're trying to be everything to everybody. We're trying to have the most fans. And that is a strategy that I feel never works. It's only when we kind of hone down on what is important to us and what we have to give and how we can connect with people. That's where the magic really happens, it's deep inside those values. I'm going to talk more when we get into the marketing section about how you can use these values to create actual marketing materials. So we'll talk more about this, but if one of your values is innovation, you could have a YouTube video series where you test out new devices and software, and you can be that guy that everybody knows to send their beta products to because you're going to test it and you know so much about innovation and that's your thing. And then you have other innovative musicians and other innovative fans who are following your YouTube channel because that's important to them, and you become the expert at that one area. And then when you make music, all those people know that you use these products and you use all this stuff and that is innovative, right? It all just feeds into itself. If one of your values is joy, then you could make short, joyful Instagram posts or videos where, you try to make it sunshine on a rainy day, right? So I want you guys to really think about, what are your core values? What's important to you? What are those these are deep intrinsic values. And I want you to think about where they came from. Who told you that those were your values? And was it your voice or was it somebody else's? Have you been living someone else's values this whole time? And is that holding you back from being who you were truly meant to be? Did your grandma tell you that so-and-so was important to you, but as time went on, you realized that it wasn't? And you don't have to answer to anybody else. You have to live your life. You have to follow your own path. And whatever values were imparted on you through various friends or family members in the past, it's time to really start exploring those and making sure that they're still important to you and that they're still relevant and that they still apply to the life that you're living right now and the life you're going to live after this pandemic is over. So I will upload the core values worksheet. On top of, there's a list of values. I want you to go through and circle them all. The process for it is to read the list, have a gut reaction, circle the ones that you like, and just, if you can print it, that's cool. If not, I'm like a handwriter. I feel really deeply connected to my pen. And so I would look at the list of core values and I would write down the ones that I love and then try to define them. The way that I said optimism. We see good in situations. We see potential in people. and we see positive energy as a tangible thing that we can give. If you're having a hard time defining it, then I want you to see if it's really one of your core values. Kind of think about it for a little while and think like, I think this is important to me, but I can't explain why. I want you to, dive a little bit deeper into that. So I will upload the core values worksheet. I want you to write down, try to get like 10 or 15 of them that are important to you, and then sleep on them for a day or two. Try to define them, and then try to narrow them down to less than 7. That's the goal, is 7 or less. I have 5. Some people think 3 is enough. I'm not sure. I think 5 is perfect, 5 to 7. And if you're so inclined, please share what your core values are in the group. That would be awesome if you're comfortable with that. I'll share mine in there. And I'm super excited to see what you guys have. This is the foundation of everything else that we're going to build. So take time with it, take care of yourselves, and just, really nurture where this stuff is growing from in your heart, because this is what you're going to share and what you've already been sharing with your fans and your clients and your people, So get a little poetic with it. All right? Take care.
When Songs Mean Business is a production of Steph Belcher Business Management, LLC. This episode was hosted, edited, and produced by me, Steph Belcher. Please make sure to join us in our Facebook group, When Songs Mean Business, and follow us on Instagram at When Songs Mean Business. As always, thank you to The Dropout for the break music. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.